give a few minutes for people to get in that are trying to get in, and we'll get started. Not letting me. Okay, fine. I guess I have to. Okay, here we are. We're gonna get started now. If anybody comes in later, that's fine. Let's just try to get moving. So the plan for today, as I discussed last week, is to talk about the Michael Brown shooting. And this was a shooting that took place in 2014. It was something that was kind of, at the time anyway, very controversial. It kind of was the first case that really went viral, that kind of brought attention to the issue of police shootings, particularly when they involve the police shooting somebody who themselves does not have a firearm or another weapon. So the Shooting took place on August 9th, 2014. So about 8 years ago, in a town called Ferguson, which is a suburb of St. Louis, in the north part of St. Louis County. And it immediately drew national attention because, there was a lot of unrest and a lot of stories flying around about what happened that turned out to be untrue. The media, kind of, fanned the flames of hysteria before the investigation could be complete, and it caused such chaos and such a stir, not just in the St. Louis area, but around the country, that the FBI did something they have never done before, and that is they actually published their full investigation online. And it's still accessible. If you search and you go on YouTube, or not YouTube, sorry, you go on Google and you search for Michael Brown FBI report, and it's one of the top sources that comes up. And I'm going to share. Did I share it already? Yes, I did. And that's what I pulled up here today. But because I don't want anybody to think that I'm trying to put my own slant on things, or that this is anything other than a review of the facts of the case. And it also kind of gets us into this, because there's a lot of impatience whenever we have something happens that gets national attention, right? Everybody wants to know, what's true, what's false, what's right, what's wrong, and they want to know it now, and they get rather frustrated, when they're told, well, we're investigating, and it's like, why does it take so long? In the case of Michael Brown, this happened in August. They did not actually announce that they weren't charging the officer until November. Criminal investigations are methodical exercises. You have to do things a certain way in a certain order, and you have to keep certain things quiet until you're ready to proceed with either a criminal case or to declare that there will not be a criminal case. Because releasing too much information too soon can jeopardize the investigation itself, and it can also, getting in too big of a hurry to finish, can also mean that you conducted an incomplete investigation. So I'm not necessarily trying to say that they didn't take too long to finish that investigation, but that's one of the reasons that it takes a lot longer than people realize, is because they had, and in this particular case, because it got so much national attention, they had hundreds, and hundreds of people that came out of the woodwork trying to claim to be witnesses. That throughout the course of the investigation, several of those witnesses, they weren't even there. They were just trying to get their 15 minutes of fame, by going on TV and saying, I saw the whole thing, when in reality they were not even there. So that being said, I do want to play this video. Was a media interview a few days after the shooting with a subject that was walking alongside Mr. Brown, who is his friend, who was walking alongside of him, and really did witness the whole thing up close and personal, because he was right there. So
it was around 1:40, 2 o'clock. We were walking down the street, an empty street. We were just walking down, minding our own business. We're both headed home, and the officer is approaching us, and as he pulled up on the side of us, he didn't say freeze, halt, or nothing like we were committing a crime. He said, get the F on the sidewalk. I told the officer we were not but a minute away from the destination. he's at an angle where we're so close to his door and him that when he tries to thrust the door open aggressively, it doesn't come an inch out before it strikes both of us. His arm extended out the window, grabbed my friend around the neck. He didn't say step back or anything like that. He started to pull my friend into the window. So the officer's trying to pull him in and he's pulling away from the officer. He never once attempted to grab for this officer's weapon. He's still holding my friend with one arm, and now with the other hand, he's pointing his weapon. The second time he says, "I'll shoot," it wasn't even a second later before the gun just went off and the officer let go. And that's how we were able to run at the same time. The first car I see, I duck behind for cover because I fear for my life. I'm scared. I don't know what's going on. I don't understand why this officer is shooting his weapon at us. And I'm looking, I'm watching the officer. He's pursuing my friend now that he fired another shot. It struck my friend in the back. Then my friend stopped running. His hands immediately went in the air and he turned around towards the officer face to face. He started to tell the officer that he was unarmed and that you should stop shooting me. Before he can get his second sentence out, the officer fired several more shots into his head and chest areas. And he fell dramatically in the fatal position. I did not hear once he yelled, "Freeze, stop," or "halt." It was just horrible to watch. It hurt him a lot. I see it in his eyes. It hurt him a lot. It was definitely like being shot like an animal. It was almost like putting someone to execution. He was a peaceful person and he lived his life peaceful. I definitely think he's guilty of murder.
So there was this interview and there were several other people. The media was very eager because the police weren't talking other than to say that they were investigating it. And so there was lots of people that came on TV and told similar stories. Every single one of them in the FBI report were proven to be either lying or exaggerating, or that they're, that they weren't even there. Now this particular individual was there, but of course he is Mr. Brown's friend. And so he said some things that we know and can prove were not true. Michael Brown was never shot in the back. We know that from the autopsy. St. Louis County Medical Examiner did an autopsy. The feds did their own autopsy, and then the family paid for a third autopsy. All of them proved that he was not shot in the back. There were no entrance wounds on the back. The only thing that the family autopsy showed is that technically, because the arm is such a, because you can move it pretty much 360 degrees, right? There was like 2 shots in the arm that technically you cannot say for sure, what position Michael Brown was in whenever they were fired, because he, depending upon whether his arm was rocked back or forward or whatever. So those were, we'd say, inconclusive, but none of the credible eyewitnesses say that any shots were fired while his back was turned to the officer. And that's what we're going to get into, and that's why these investigations take the time that they take, is because you have to interview everybody, right? Let them tell their story, let them say what they have to say, and then you have to compare that to what other witnesses are saying and forensic evidence. So this young man went on TV and said that his friend was shot in the back as he's running away. That is an untrue statement. It just is. Other witnesses said that Michael Brown did not, get in the car and assault the officer. Well, we know that's untrue because his DNA is, on the officer's head and neck, meaning that he did assault the officer. So we know that, And so the credible eyewitnesses, in other words, the eyewitnesses that didn't tell part of their story that was contradicted by physical evidence, they all pretty much line up with what the officer himself said happened, which is that he he was leaving another call that was nearby, and he saw these subjects that were walking in the middle of the street and traffic was having trouble getting around them. And so he told them to get off the street. He claims that he didn't use profanity. They claim that he said, you know, get the F off the street. Regardless of whether he was rude to them or not, he said for them to get off the street, and they did not. At that time, he noticed that Michael Brown was carrying a pack of cigars that, and then instantly he remembered about, I don't know, a minute or two before, a call came out on the radio that somebody had robbed a local gas station, and they had taken cigars, and they gave the description of two gentlemen that matched the description of these two people that were walking in the street. Anyway, the officer starts to put two and two together, so he decides he's going to detain these individuals, figure out if they are in fact the people that stole from the convenience store. So he backs up and puts himself in a position, in hindsight, I'm sure, that he realizes was not a good thing to do, but he basically backs right up to them and then tries to get out of his car. And according to the officer and several of the eyewitnesses, Michael Brown would not let him get out of the car. He, you know, kept shoving the door shut, and then he comes through the open window and starts beating the crap out of the officer. And Mr. Brown is a large individual. You know, he's like 6'5", 300+ pounds, you know, kind of built like a linebacker. And he's assaulting the officer in his car. So the officer is pinned in a position, can't really do anything. So according to the officer's statement, he pulls his firearm because it's the only thing he could really get to that had a likelihood of ending the threat. Because his OC, you know, in such short quarters, he was going to be as incapacitated as Brown was if he tried to deploy that. He couldn't get to his baton because that's behind his back. A lot of departments, you know, have you carry your baton behind your firearm, which is bad when you're in the car because you can't get it out. Plus, he wouldn't have had room to deploy it anyway because he's inside the car. So it was left with the firearm as his only option. He pulls it out, tells him to stop or he's going to shoot. And as soon as he says that, Brown starts trying to fight for the weapon. Now, his friend here on TV said, oh, he never touched the weapon. He never fought the officer. He never did anything like that. But, you know, the evidence says otherwise. You know, he had a contact wound to his right hand, which means his right hand was in front of the barrel, you know. Well, part of it anyway. The palm of his right hand was in front of the barrel, which would be consistent with somebody trying to grab the barrel of a weapon. You know, not to mention his DNA was on the firearm, which means, again, that when he got shot, some of his blood and things got on the firearm. It's also on, you know, Wilson, you know, and the interior of the car. So it proves that he was inside the car, that he did assault the officer. He did try to grab the weapon. All of those things are, you know, they're not up for debate. They were proven, you know, and so witness statements such as this guy that say things that are blatantly false, he can't testify. He couldn't testify credibly about anything because he'd have to explain why he said things that were untrue, you know. And so that's why these things take time. They interviewed hundreds of people. They interviewed, you know, and they went through loads and loads of evidence, you know, everything from, you know, how far did Michael Brown run before he turned around, you know, to the fact that some people claim he didn't charge back at the officer, but the blood evidence tells a different tale because he was bleeding from his wound the entire time. So there's a trail that police officers were able to follow and document and everything else. The St. Louis County, Missouri Highway Patrol, and the Justice Department, the FBI, they all did their own investigations. You know, they worked together and they did their own investigations. And this happened from early on, very early on in the case. So, you know, there really isn't any room to say that anything was covered up or improperly done. on purpose. And fact of the matter is, from my perspective at the time anyway, it seemed that if they had anything on this officer, they were going to use it, because there was a lot of fear at the time about what was going to happen when they announced that there were no charges, because we had so much rioting and stuff beforehand, and it turned out to not be quite as bad as what people feared that it was going to be. Honestly, the worst rioting was in the first few weeks after, and after that, it was more controlled. So anyway, so this is, like I said, if you go and you Google search for the report, this is kind of what you're going to come up with from the FBI. And it goes into and goes into, kind of at the beginning, it's more of a summary style thing for people that don't want to necessarily do a deep dive, but then they really go into detail about all the forensic evidence, the DNA analysis, the dispatch recordings, ballistics, and how it all ties together. And that's what you've got to do in a case like this, where you've got people, folks here, Mr. Brown's friend, talk about how he got shot like an animal while he was surrendering and all this other stuff, and they think justice must be done. And so some of the people that came out of the woodwork when they were exposed in their lies, and asked to make an account of it, nobody got charged with making a false statement, by the way. But when they were confronted with their lies, many of them admitted that they just didn't want to see this officer get away with murder. They were convinced that he was guilty, and they were willing to do what it took to make sure that he paid for his crime. So they actually stole somebody else's story. They actually told his story because they saw it on TV, or they knew, a witness, and they wanted it to make sure that it was, well documented and all that. So there's a lot of concerns that we have whenever we're trying to figure out what happened, and we have conflicting stories from people, right? Because somebody's lying and somebody's telling the truth, and it's not always obvious which one's which. So again, in this particular case, there's no video. This was before really body cameras were commonplace. They existed, but they were, so cost prohibitive that most departments did not have them. And so we have no cell phone images or anything like that. It just happened that way. So we have no actual recordings of the thing. There were, I think, one or two people that happened to be on the phone at the time nearby, and so the gunshots were recorded on like cell phone video or cell phone, what do you call it, audio. And so they were able to get that, and so that helped to kind of, again, give something for, some people said that there was, all the shots were fired all at once, and other people said, 2-shot volleys, 3-shot volleys, 7-shot volleys. I think he said like 10 shots all at once, which was obviously untrue. We also have, they recovered, the bullets. Where did the bullets go? What was the bullet's path? That can help to sort out how far away was the officer from the suspect, and that kind of stuff. So there's all kinds of things that tie together. And if you can tie those things together, then you have a lot better chance of piecing together precisely what happened, which is what they've done here. If you ever have, a half hour, 45 minutes or something, and you're curious, it's publicly accessible. All you have to do is Google search Michael Brown FBI report, and it's right there from the Justice Department website. So, the the summary basically says that the Justice Department concluded that Darren Wilson's actions did not constitute prosecutable violations under applicable federal criminal civil rights act, and basically that his actions were objectively reasonable under the circumstances, meaning that given what he knew at the time, which is, that for whatever reason, Mr. Brown seemed to be consumed by the emotion of anger and was, had already attacked him and was preparing to attack him again whenever he was shot subsequently. He was in imminent danger of death or serious bodily harm, which is the standard for use of force, regardless of whether you're a cop or not. If somebody, poses a serious risk, to your life, you can respond and you can defend yourself to a reasonable degree. And so people are beaten to death. It does happen. Not to mention the fact that from a law enforcement officer's perspective, all he has to do is beat him unconscious, and then he can access his own weapons. And police officers are sometimes shot and killed with their own firearm. It does happen. And it's an unfortunate statistic, but it does happen. So, there was real reason to fear, whenever he's trying to take the gun away from the officer has a whole lot of legitimate fear that he's going to not just take it and run away, but he's going to take it and use it to kill the officer. So, by any standard, the use of force here was justified, and the FBI published the report because they wanted people to know that they're not just trying to rubber stamp something, that wasn't right. It wasn't even a situation where it was technically legal, but still not okay kind of thing. I mean, he was being attacked, and he defended himself in kind, and the only thing that might have made a difference, and probably even then still would have been, maybe if he would have, his department didn't issue tasers, and maybe if he'd had a taser, he could have maybe used that. But, I've seen more videos showing tasers failing than tasers succeeding. I mean, it really is, you gotta get them just right. And technically, with somebody attacking you like that, the only target that he would have had would have been his head and his chest, which are not, they're not appropriate targets, because you don't want, the barbs to get in their eyes. You don't want electricity through their freaking brain, and you don't want to hit their heart, and so those were the only targets he had. Now granted, he would have been justified because he was justified to use deadly force, but nevertheless, I can't say that it would have saved Mr. Brown's life, especially considering his willingness to charge at an officer who had already shot him. The fatal wound was the very last one. If he'd have stopped at any point before then, there's a chance that he could have been taken to a trauma center and saved, but he kept coming. He was seemingly, just kind of having some kind of a break, and that it does happen to people sometimes. I believe his family when they say that this is out of character for him. They don't believe that he could have done, what he did, but it's one of those things, that sometimes people do things that are out of character because emotions can make you, at least temporarily crazy, so that is what happened that day, is that, this officer tried to stop him, and he was like in a not today kind of mood, and he did what he did, and that was what that was just all there was to it. I'm gonna figure out who's here real quick. And I also want to apologize before I end this if my audio or video is sketchy. I'm don't have the best internet connection here where I am in this old house, and so I will also post a recording if you were unable to or had difficulty understanding what I've said. But I appreciate everybody coming on, and you know, we will be in class on Wednesday like normal, and I'll see you then. Also, if anybody didn't take the exam on Friday, please email me and let me know, because I know one person had an issue where they started it and it kind of glitched on them. So I'm going to reset that today after class. But if anybody else had issues, let me know. Email me and I'll sort it out for you. So have a good day, and I'll see you guys on Wednesday.
See you, teacher.
See ya.
Thank you.
Mhm.